Alright, BoobTube. We're going to get to working on the Miata today. It's going to be a lot of time lapses. I've already got it up off the ground with the wheels off and drained the fluid out of the rear gear. And I've set the 512 up. I'm not impressed with this gear set anymore. We originally had raced it and like kind of blown it up, and it's got like some tight spots. And you can see where the gear has like, my finger gets out of the way there. Let's see if we can focus. It's not gonna focus. Anyways, there's a lot of wear on the pinion gear because it actually got so hot that it pushed the seals out and drained all the fluid out of it. So this might only be in for this track day. And we might be going back to the 430, but we'll test it and find out. It's going to be a much better gear for the RPMs that this thing spins. So I'm going to get y'all set up, and we're going to drop the rear gear, and I'll probably do a voiceover of the time lapse. Let's get started. All right, so here you can see I am pulling the drive shaft out of the car. End up getting this done real easily with impact after figuring out that one side is held. I'd kind of forgotten about that previously. And then I start working on draining the fluid out of the gear. Well, looks like actually first I'm gonna remove the PPF out of the way, but here in a second I'm gonna work on getting the gear oil out and get started on that. I had kind of forgotten how much of a pain in the butt pulling the gear set out without dropping the whole rear chunk out of the car. How much of a pain it was. You saw me ratchet strap the PPF over out of the way so that the gear would hopefully fall out. And yeah, so here I'm just removing the upper control arm bolts so that I can pull the axles out of the gears, and those just pop out. You just take a little pry bar and you pry on the back side of the axles, and they fall right on out. And the fun part is with these gear sets, they're RTV'd together, and so they can be a pain to get separated sometimes. You can see here I've worked on this over the course of about 10 or 15 minutes based on the time lapse just to break it free so that I can get the gear set out. And then I'm fixing to set this thing on my face, if I remember correctly, or pretty close to on my face. Nope, I dropped it into the pan and I forgot. It fell into the pan and knocked a hole in the bottom of the pan, so I get to clean that mess up here in about 10-15 minutes once I realized that was a thing. But I had a pretty big ordeal getting the new chunk in. Since it's a 512, it means that the pinion and ring gear, well, mainly the ring gear, is substantially larger than a typical ring gear for these. So I had a hard time pressing the thing up there. And then what I ended up figuring out is the PPF was keeping me from being able to throw it up in there correctly. It was getting hung on the side. And so I fought with this for probably half an hour to an hour, just getting this thing up in here, trying to use the jack, and then trying to bench press it up in there again later on, setting it on the ground, smashing my fingers a couple times. So I eventually get it all figured out and thrown up in there, but I determined that I just need to pull the PPF out of the way a little bit further. And as soon as I did that, I was able to bench press it up in there real easy. And I thought I was gonna have to reapply some RTV. I was worried that it was gonna be all hardened and I was gonna have to scrape it off and redo it, but it turned out to be okay. I ended up applying a little bit more where I had smeared it off trying to put it in, but once I got it up in there, it was smooth sailing after that. And then here in a second, you're gonna see me try to reattach the PPF back onto the gear, and I cut my finger good. I I talk about it in the next clip, but I pretty much, the pry bar slipped and I slid my finger across the stamped steel piece of the subframe and it sliced it up pretty good. But that right there was me doing that, and we'll talk about it here in just a second.
Alright, you saw in the last video, or the last portion of that time lapse, I've got everything back together. All I have left to do is put the excuse me, upper A-arm bolts back together and put the PPF back on. I actually cut my finger up pretty good trying to put the PPF on. I fought the subframe, and the subframe won. So I'm going to get all that back together, and then I'm going to start working on weighing the car and changing the wing up for this weekend. So I'm going to dive into that, and when we come back, we'll talk about adjusting the wing. Alright, so I'm getting ready to set the car back down, and I wanted to discuss a little bit about something that a lot of people don't really talk about when setting up cars. Is you can, if you have a lift, it's really easy to do this. You can lift the car up and down and kind of roll it back and forth on your stands, but with me not having a lift, I'm using something called a grease plates, which is literally just two, 1/16 of an inch, I think is what this is, aluminum plates, and you smear grease in between them so that when you set the car down, the tire is allowed to scoot as the suspension compresses, so that you don't have the suspension in a weird bind because the tire is holding it from being able to slide out. So this allows for more accurate scaling of the car along with alignments without having to set the car all the way on the ground, roll it, and then roll it up on the jack stand or on the scales or what have you. So just a tidbit, a little info, and I'm going to go ahead and set the car down, get the fronts on it, sit in the car and see how much the car weighs with me in it, and see if it's close to 50%. Alright, got the car down on the scales. It's 2,100 pounds without me in it. It's going to be about 2,300 with me in it. But that's not what we're worried about. We're more worried about the cross weight, which in these Miatas helps with corner balance. So 2,300 pounds, that's not too bad. There's a lot of weight in here that I could cut out, like there's a passenger seat with passenger belts and then a whole bunch of stuff in the back. But let's see what the cross weight is. Oh no! I made a grave mistake there. Well, shucks. It ends up being like, I've already seen it once. It ends up being like 51.5%. So we're gonna work on getting it down closer to 50, and then yeah, I'll probably set up a time lapse for that so that you can see how much of a pain in the butt it is, and we'll go from there. All right. Well, I went to set up my the time lapse for this and disconnect all the sway bars and everything, and sat back down in the car for the first setup, and I don't need to change anything. So that's pretty dagburn close. The original measurement that I showed you was with the sway bars hooked up, and to do cross, to set up the cross balance, you disconnect the sway bars. So 50.2%, I mean, I could chase 50% dead on, but that is that's not worth it. So let's see what the total weight is with me in it. 2337. So I'm gonna get out and put the sway bars back on, which is kind of a pain in the butt, but it's good to know that this is dead on the money now, and it's the reason why the car drives so good. Anyways, next I'm gonna adjust the wing, and then probably take this thing for a test drive to make sure that the rear gear is good, since I haven't driven it with the rear gear yet. So let's get going. All right, measuring the angle of attack of the wing. Find a flat piece of something or another. I got this angle finder. Okay, it's at 0. This should be almost 0 from what I originally set it up. Yeah. So my goal is to get, we'll probably shoot for 3 degrees, maybe 5 degrees, to give it some good angle of attack now versus what I've had it. So I've got a little bit more downforce. Remember the last time I had this on track, it was a little loose in the rear end out of some fast corners, so that should help. So let's get started on that. I'll set up a time lapse for this. All right, well that was fairly simple, as you can see. So it's now at 5 degrees of attack, and after lunch we're gonna pull this out. All right, back from our track day event, and I'll post a little clip in here, a little sneak peek of some of the shenanigans that went on. But car went great. It is time to pull the engine out. It's got a little low oil pressure. Actually, some would consider it very low pressure, but it seems like it is indicative of the front O-ring being blown out on the front cover. So hopefully it's that. I'm gonna change when I drain the oil. I'm gonna see if I see any sparklies in it, and we will go from there. But yeah, so everything went really well. Deuces, guys.